everybody. Welcome, both those here in the room and those that are connected via Zoom to this three-panel event that we are putting together in the context of the Caribbean Investment Forum. The Private Financial Advisory Network, as many of you know, is a global network supporting developers to move forward their projects and reach bankability and help them reach financial closing. And there are topics that we think that they are always discussed, but they need a little more discussions in terms of depth. And the idea here is to bring us three panels with experts to discuss openly about topics without particular format. So, thank you.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I guess I'll just jump straight in. The first panel, which we have this afternoon, is looking at two issues, overlapping but slightly separate issues. One around the first issue is around renewables, and the second issue then is the ever popular issues around e-mobility and electric vehicles, but wider than electric vehicles as well, so low carbon, I guess, low carbon transport and all issues around transport. We have five panelists: Marcia Maynard from National Energy, Donald Baldew-Singh from the Carbon Zero TNT and the chairman of the Enman Group, Graham King from University of the West Indies, in charge of their, I don't know the exact right title, but the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Group at UWI. Curtis Mohammed, who is now a very happy energy consultant, free to give his opinions, consultant around low carbon mobility and renewable energy, and Curtis Boodoo. Sonny, we're going to have you down here as University of Trinidad and Tobago, but now you're not. You're now with UN system. You'll have to remind me exactly what your role is there. Sorry. With both, okay. What I thought we would do is, because a lot of the questions and discussions often come around, people get very excited about the transport issues because we all spend so much time sitting in our cars in traffic. I thought we'd perhaps start with the renewable energy side of things. And what I'm going to do is ask the two panelists, first of all Marcia and then Donald, just to identify what they think the key issues are. Just take a couple of minutes each, please, and we're sort of a bit behind schedule, so I think people need to be really tight and just give us just the headlines of you think are the big points you want to get out on these issues. Marcia, if you start, and then Donald will follow.
strategies from the government in terms of its own targets. The latest target, of course, being 30% of your electricity production coming from renewable energy sources by 2030. Of course, whether or not that NDC in itself, there have been, especially as we go into the discussions in Egypt, whether or not we would see some change as it relates to that NDC, but that is in fact the latest target for Trinidad and Tobago. From National Energy and National Energy being forming part of the NGC group, of course, we are in fact involved in looking at this whole aspect of energy transitioning. And I can speak in terms of trying to do implementation of projects both on the commercial level as well as in terms of utility scale level. So I'll give the example of on a commercial scale, we have done an implementation of a 100 kilowatt commercial system on the Presal service station. It is one of the few service stations where, certainly when we had the national blackout in April, it was one of those stations that you could have, persons were in the station and it was operating on, based on, because you would have had, it has a battery backup system, and people were able to go in there and utilize the services of the station. So that has been in operation since September of 2021. And even in that regard, it's still required in terms of, even as we get into licenses and so on, it's still required, and us being even a state agency. It did take some time, so I think in terms of as you want to move into these kinds of spaces, we really have to move into a space of being customer focused, and certainly in terms of being able to drive efficiencies across the agencies that are involved in trying for persons to do these types of projects. On the utility scale, I can speak to, in terms of Project Lara, and I think there's a lot of conversation around that space. The project itself is looking at two sites. There is in fact going to be about 20 megawatts at an Orange Grove site, which will involve in terms of the University of the West Indies. And then there's another site, 92 megawatts at Brecon Castle, where National Energy is earmarked to be the landlord for that particular site. And in addition to which, as would have been present in most of, as the country has transitioned in many different areas, moving from being oil-based into being natural gas-based economies, the NGC group has always been there. And we will also be here as well in terms of this transition, because of the fact that we are in fact also considering, we are doing an equity evaluation to participate in that utility scale project. And I think as you do that project, it certainly brings into highlight in being an island and having competing interests as it relates to land. And really and truly, if you really want to drive and get into the achievement of some of those targets locally, you really have to talk about the distributive type of generation and all that it would require in order for us to be successful in that particular space. The other last point that I also wanted to touch on why renewables are also important for us locally is that we are in an industry, we also have an industrial sector, and there has been a lot of work that we have been doing with the IDB in terms of looking at being able to decarbonize that industry, whether or not it be from market forces, even from your own, trying to achieve your own commitments on your NDCs or otherwise. You still, in terms of looking at the possibility of utilizing those technologies, and for us, we primarily will be looking at wind, mainly more on the offshore side, in being able to be a driver in being able to decarbonize that petrochemical sector. It's really being able to future-proof your industry, because as you move into 2030 to 2050, you're going to see some change. Certainly, a lot of changes taking place on the international scale. And therefore, if you want to be in the business of having a petrochemical sector, you really have to take some specific steps. And the renewable energy technologies on the local environment certainly plays a role there. So that's it. I think I might have gone over my 3 minutes, but that's it. Yes, sorry.
Yes, but not by too much. So, okay. Donald, try to follow that good example and keep it tight.
I don't know if I could promise that, Dax.
You can promise everything.
True. So, I'm stepping back to look at the big picture of the Caribbean and to summarize in less than 3 minutes a 25-year journey where I've been working on this idea of integrating the energy markets of the Caribbean. The context is that And in fact, the context have changed over the years. Excuse me, a long time ago, we were talking about alternative energy. Then it was just pure renewable energy. Now it's about energy transition. And one of the main points I'd like to note is that the Caribbean has sufficient renewable energy resources to supply all of our current needs and well into the future. The problem is that as mostly island states, the location of the resources is separate and not connected. So much of the renewable energy in the region is like how gas was in Trinidad and Tobago in the 50s and 60s into the 70s. A very good but stranded resource. And you have to use innovation to take it to a market or create a market for it. In this case, the market is there because you have a big demand for high cost commodity, electricity in the region. Islands in the Caribbean now are paying upwards of 55 US cents per kilowatt hour for power in this current oil price scenario. And they're producing a lot of carbon emissions at a time when we are all small island developing states, hugely affected by climate change. So the question is how to mobilize this renewable energy resource to make it available to the people of the region. And the idea is to integrate the markets. And the way that we have been working is via a power cable system. So some islands can produce geothermal energy, others wind, solar. Trinidad and Tobago can contribute with wind and have the gas power as a backup on the system. So you have a lot of reliability built in. And then to the south in Guyana and Suriname, you have hydropower resources. So when we build a hydropower reservoir dam, you have a storage there for energy. So you could imagine using solar during the day and hydro at night in an integrated power system. We've been working on this for a long time, as I say. The context has changed because now there's a huge driver in terms of decarbonizing. And now we're working on the master plan. We're engaging with stakeholders and working towards step-by-step building out this power system. I hope I haven't gone over.
Thank you, Donald. That was great. I don't know if there's any questions at the audience. I have one. I thought we could perhaps take a couple of questions now before we move on to the sort of the mobility part of the conversation. So I don't know if any questions from the audience.
Hello. So my question is about aggregation across islands. Has been a lot of talk and technology assessment, but I still don't see the way that practically having different utilities and different systems in place, integration through underwater cable, no matter how many feasibility studies can prove that is doable, is actually actionable. It's because you have situations like St. Kitts and Nevis that they have everything in place to do it, and they will not do it, basically because the utilities will not work together, and the two islands have issues on governance on the electricity. Thank you.
So in some ways, what you're talking about there is a sort of Marcia was talking about silos within the Trinidad government system. You're talking about here then relationships between different utilities, some state-owned, some privately owned, some a mix. I don't know, Donald, if you want to take that at all?
Yes, good point. The problems are not technological in any way. They're not even commercial for most of it. We have looked at step-by-step viable projects that have a very good rate of return. The issues are political, personal, and we have to get past them. But we can't do it by trying to get all the leadership in the Caribbean into one room to sign one document. What we have to do is do it step by step. And this is why our first stage is Trinidad to Guyana. We have in Trinidad and Tobago, Courtney is here, something like 600 megawatts of surplus power generation capacity that is either not contracted by TNTech or contracted but not in active use. We have pockets of gas that can come to that kind of market, and therefore we can generate power and sell to Guyana at less than half of what they're paying today while building out the first leg. Then the hydropower in Guyana can come onto the system and bring a large injection of renewable energy into the Trinidad and Tobago grid. So that's the first stage. Then we're looking now at up the islands, and there's an island that is very, very keen on coming into the system right now. So we have to do it step by step. Thank you.
Courtney, you want to? You just, Courtney, wait for the mic, because there's people who are on Zoom, so they might be able to hear.
Thank you very much. Permit me to link what Marcia said with what Donald just had to say about surplus electricity. Marcia, there's some consideration you said that NGC is giving to equity investment in the solar project and so on. But that solar project will bring about 112 megawatts of power onto the grid. Donald just described some excess power already sitting on the grid, yes. And he's talking about possibly getting power to Guyana. So we seem to be even adding more power to this surplus in Trinidad, while other people nearby are paying higher rates for power. And it just seems, to be confusing that we can't get that power out. How are we going to leverage this excess power that is coming on the grid, Marcia?
Claudia said.
Courtney, you're asking some interesting questions. But one of the things that you have to take into context as well has to be on the NGC side, which is there has been a lot of conversation as it relates to the use of power, natural gas for power, right? In the context, if you look at it from the economics of it, it is not the preferred option for the use of the natural gas, right? There has been a lot of, I think even from the NGC side, even from the Energy Chamber, in terms of public education, as it relates to what is the true cost of electricity, right, in Trinidad and Tobago. So the idea is that you want to actually utilize renewable energy sources for your power production, so that you, in fact, can utilize your natural gas molecules for a more higher value purpose, right? The economics, in terms of even when we run the economics of just on the utility scale project alone, if we even add in that natural gas that is saved and the value that you can place on even incremental, and let's look at the price of what you for that commodity that exists on the external market, it is a tremendous economic value add in terms of just simply whatever gas is saved from that project and you being able to utilize it elsewhere. So even, yes, in terms of you would be bringing on additional power, but we have to look at what it in fact does to the system in the sense from the overall economic of it is that you want to demonstrate that you can do that utilizing a renewable energy source to produce your power, rather than you utilizing your natural gas molecules, which can in fact go to your higher valued industries. And I think that is also the context that you have to consider when it relates to that. When you talk about in terms of not just simply adding on power, but it's what is the source of that power that is being added on to the grid.
I'm seeing a theme here of silos. If you take gas within a silo and electricity in a silo, you may end up with the best use of energy.
Yeah.
Well, it forces the comment now,
yes,
is that when you say look at the bigger picture, that bigger picture has boundaries.
Yes.
So I can appreciate from an NGC standpoint,
Agreed.
Certainly you are saving gas that could be directed to more value-added production and inputs, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But if you extended that boundary to the entire country,
mm-hmm.
TNTech remains saddled with a conversion cost that is contractual for the capacity that is now supplied to the country. So somebody has to deal with that elephant. Somebody has to move those contractual arrangements in some other direction. And that conversation has to start, because you can't be committed and locked into something you saw 30 years ago and come today and add something and have no impact on those contractual arrangements. Donald, I mean, you understand clearly what I'm referring to, and you either find new markets for your surplus, or you force the contractual conversation to take shape with the new future you're seeing.
Mr. Courtney Mark had to respond to the Public Affairs Enterprises Committee in the Parliament on that question a few years ago, when he was asked about the surplus power and also the surplus heat, the waste heat in Trinity Power and Point Lisa's power gen. We have a lot of energy out there, and we have assets that are being paid for by the taxpayers at TGU and elsewhere. And I'm going to make a quote that might sound controversial, and then I'll tell you who said it. Solar power at utility scale is not in the best interest of Trinidad and Tobago. And the person who said it is Mr. Spencer Dale, chief economist of BP, right here in Port of Spain a few years ago. And he was referring to the take-or-pay arrangements. And he said, quick calculations, it's going to cost you a lot of money to give concessions for solar and continue to pay capacity charges and capital repayment on the power generation equipment. So, right to your point, Dax, we need to optimize at a country level. And then we need to think about the region, and can we continue to play a leadership role in energy in the region? How do we do that? And if we start thinking about it like that, I think we will start to get some solutions that could work across the board.
Curtis, you want to comment on this, or you want to...
Quick question.
Okay. Fantastic, good.
No, I have to ask this question.
Yeah. I'll go and get some coffee.
So, Curtis Mohammed, co-panelist. The question really has to, it's not really a question as much as it is a perspective that needs to be taken care of. So, Donald, I take the point that there's infrastructure. But infrastructure alone is not one part of a holistic approach in dealing with this. So let's put that same argument in the following context. Tomorrow in Trinidad and Tobago, the prices of electricity is not 5 cents a kilowatt hour, but 25 cents a kilowatt hour from the grid, closer to what the rest of the Caribbean is. Now, do we think we will have that 600 megawatts of surplus infrastructure that's going to be easily available? The answer to that might be yes, because then people would now probably be, if that is what the grid supply price is going to be, I will be motivated now to have my own solar or my own renewables in my home. One, because the GDP per capita in Trinidad and Tobago is sufficiently strong. People could afford installation if that's the kind of price we're talking about. But it does change now the motivations of where and what I will do with my surplus. Now in Trinidad right now, the grid is the swing and everything in one. But if everybody goes onto solar, a significant portion of the people in Trinidad will go onto solar. Now that could actually be exacerbated come morning or night or wherever it is. So I think it's a little more than that. So I would say that if you were to look at balancing between countries, the time horizon for that is going to not going to be 1 year, 2 year. It might be like between 5 and 10 years. But outfitting a lot of residences within the Caribbean could actually happen in a much shorter time that will take to do a mega project like that and work out the politics behind it. So really the comment is, would that not have an impact, a significant impact in the way or the positions you think that you could do with a project like that? Sorry, I was long-winded.
Just quickly, Dax. So we need to optimize. We need to get the right people in the room. We need to tap in on Curtis here because he's been developing a model. We need to work that model out and see what it tells us. It may tell us something completely different to what we're saying here today. But in Guyana, they need 300 megawatts like yesterday. And they now put out a tender for 25 megawatts of heavy fuel oil generation, which to me is tragic because Guyana has 7,000 megawatts of hydroelectric power capacity, which is zero, which is developed. So there's the demands of today. There are short-term solutions, and then there are long-term solutions. The long-term solutions must carry us to net zero emissions by 2050, and then we start to work out what we have to do to get there.
Okay, I think we should move. That's a great conversation. We can come back to some of those points because I think they integrate with the mobility and transport issues. Let's switch to that and start with Graham. Just start your 3 minutes. Just an overview of what you see the key issues are in terms of e-mobility.
Okay, thanks, Dax. Good afternoon, everybody. I think first to say that for small island developing states, the benefits of e-mobility, electric vehicles are disproportionately higher than larger developed markets, both in terms of the issues like range not being a major constraint, and also that as a result of that, the fact that we don't need to worry so much about the range of the vehicles, then you don't need so much of an investment in public infrastructure. So most of the investment can take place at the level of the individual purchaser of a vehicle, if it's an electric car we're talking about, for instance. However, just to sort of immediately swing away from just talking about electric cars, which is the sort of hot topic, and say that really, the problem with electric cars is they're still cars and they still take up space on the road, right? So one of the big problems we've got in Trinidad and, to an extent throughout the Caribbean is congestion. And if you do a car-for-car replacement, you might get an efficiency benefit, but you still have the congestion issue. So if we look at a more holistic view of things, I think what e-mobility really does for the region is it gives it the opportunity to rethink the transportation system that exists. And transportation in the region is not thought about on a systemic level very much at all, in very limited ways. So the biggest selling electric vehicles around the world right now, the biggest selling EVs, electric motorbikes. And the majority of those are sold in the Indian subcontinent and places like Thailand and so on. So that's really the biggest market for EVs. And now the beautiful thing about an electric motorbike is that it has a much lower requirement in terms of things like the size of battery and therefore the minerals. One of the problems with EVs right now is the supply of raw materials. So really, we probably shouldn't be thinking in terms of electric cars so much as electric mobility. If you're talking electric mobility, then you can also start to talk excuse me, about things like e-bikes. So if I was commuting, of course there are other considerations in a Trinidad and Tobago context, but if I was regularly commuting, say, from where I live in Maracas Valley to Port of Spain, I could easily do that on an e-bike and charge the battery, and I get here, commute back without having to pedal at all, right? So an e-bike, and you'd actually do a faster journey time than the average journey time of driving a car on the same journey. So if we think about that, then could we start to reconsider our transport system and make it safer to use those kinds of electrified transport opportunities? So e-bikes are going in an interesting direction as well, because now in a lot of markets around the world, especially city-based sort of mobility, they're developing things like cargo bikes. So you could do transportation, delivery using extremely energy efficient, small, lightweight micro-mobility. So it could be an e-bike or it could be a little four-wheeler vehicle. So it's like, can we shift away from thinking just about electric cars, even though we want to sort of incentivize and encourage the introduction of electric cars because they're beneficial? Sorry. So yeah, let me leave it there. So just kind of broadening the thinking, really.
Curtis Mohammed.
Thank you all. So I'm going to take my 3 minutes to really kind of give some perspectives on something. And it has to do with how impactful do we think our national ambitions in lowering carbon that we could anticipate for electric mobility to contribute towards that. We know we have the 30% by 2030. Now, that's very, very challenging for a lot of places, a lot of people. And colleague here, Graham, would have indicated talk about e-bikes and so on. But the culture of transportation in any nation is very and particularly important. People will change. It normally takes about one generation to change a culture significantly. With respect to mobility in Trinidad and Tobago, then the question might be asked, we know what the rest of the world is doing, and we hear about it, we hear the talk. We have nice cars coming in now. Electric mobility is sort of appealing more towards the premium side of vehicles, because that's the conversations we have here inside Trinidad. And the rest of the world is not necessarily the conversation they would have. China and India, yes, small electric mobility that's where it goes, those sort of vehicles. So in Trinidad and Tobago, where should we really be concentrating maybe, or start thinking about policies to get us towards lower carbon? Mass market vehicles. Well, what's the appetite in Trinidad and Tobago for mass market vehicles, EVs? If I were to tell you that those vehicles need to be something that is particularly small, smaller than a TIDA, or something that in Trinidad and Tobago, you're going to get a certain amount of market. Then some people might say, well, okay, we need to do in between electric vehicles and gasoline, let's do hybrids. So it all depends on what the market is also going to want to receive. You can't dictate necessarily everything to everyone, right? The rest of the Caribbean is in the same space. So maybe we need to look at electric mobility and prioritize it on where we get the biggest bang for the buck in terms of carbon. So that's public transportation. We have government public transportation, which is PTSE, and the government is moving in that direction as well. Perfect. But we also have maxi taxis, which would be public transportation, private-owned mobility equipment using public and private roads, bus route and so on. That makes sense, but I had a conversation with these folks recently from the Maxi Association. They said, yeah, electric mobility, but we can't use an electric Maxi. It don't work like that. We are route-based, so it can't work. So then I asked the question, so why not Maxi, why not hybrids? So you get the energy efficiency component to get out it. Next question, cost. Who's going to pay for that? Even if you were to remove duties and taxes and VAT, it is still a very expensive proposition. But it makes sense. It makes sense because in Trinidad and Tobago, about 300,000 people a day outside of COVID time, 300,000 people a day use Maxis in Trinidad and Tobago. That is where you could spend money. Now, do we have government policy positions on that? Yes, we have some to lower carbon, but maybe we need to re-examine it a little more. And then finally, let's talk about the consumers. So consumers, we all here talk that we're going to change and we're going to go into electric vehicles. Now, inside this room, we probably have about 5 or 6 people for the most that might have an electric car. I've been one of them, CNG and electric. So people are enlightened, but it takes money to change equipment. So in Trinidad and Tobago, we have 1 million vehicles. We bring in about 20,000 vehicles a year. Changing vehicles to go to low carbon will take you, let's say, 1 million vehicles divided by 20,000 a year. If all the 20,000 was low carbon, it's still 50 years, right? Correct math? Right. It's about 50 years to change the inventory into low carbon. But you have other ways you could get low carbon, right? You could change, guess what? The fuel. You could use low carbon fuels. You could use ethanol. You could blend certain things. We have the compressed natural gas program that's going as well. But is there a way? Can we now convert vehicles? Is there a way to convert existing vehicles into electrification? I know that's one approach that's being talked about. And I think that's the kind of thing we need to start looking for. See, we have to get creative and see what fits the culture of Trinidad and Tobago. That'll be my contribution, sir.
Let's quickly go to the last presenter on the panel, the second Curtis.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Or the first Curtis, which way? I don't know. The other Curtis.
The other. Good afternoon, and I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I just want to say something to Curtis Mohammed. In his absence from e-mobility, panels like this in the past, it has been very boring. I'm glad you're back again. So thank you. So my contribution is actually a combination of what Graham would have touched on and Curtis. When you look at energy, you always say that you should invest in energy efficiency and energy conservation first. But you need to incorporate that thinking in transportation as well. And I think both Graham and Curtis covered that. There are some policy changes that can be made to help the transportation sector. One of them being allowing ride sharing or the modernized use of ride sharing. In Trinidad, it is illegal for you to offer your vehicle for hire without a H designation. So we are unable to utilize popular ride sharing services that are prevalent in other jurisdictions. The other thing is the implementation of a work from home policy by public sector institutions. This would have been done by private sector institutions, organizations, but it needs to move towards the public sector. So we want to try to move people out of the roads and have them not using the roads as much. And this adds to the thinking of energy efficiency and conservation before you reach the stage of the electrification of transportation. Curtis as well touched on public transportation, which is an area I'm involved in as well. We need an efficient, reliable, and safe public transportation system in Trinidad. PTSC needs to be modernized. And again, that's all about moving people out of the roads and into the efficient use of public transportation. So those are the policy interventions that we should focus on in addition to the electrification of transportation. Now, the electrification of transportation does solve the issues as it relates to the payment of extra capacity that both Donald, Courtney, and Marcia would have talked about. Because the more electric vehicles you have that electricity load coming onto the grid, and you would reduce your importation of diesel and gasoline, which we currently do, right? So we want to move away from importing diesel and gasoline and use our indigenous natural gas, and you will get savings there. So electrification of transportation can contribute to that. But that's basically my contribution, Dax. I look forward to the questions. Thanks.
Curtis, just a quick question. I know you've done work before on the potential role of batteries and electric vehicles of helping sort of balance the grid and how that could work, and also in a post-disaster situation. Do you just want to comment on that issue?
Right. So at UTT, we have an electric bus. Its battery capacity is about 10 times the capacity of a 2018 Nissan Leaf, right? So it's a large battery. And I think the average home in Trinidad uses around, what, Courtney, 3 kilowatts of power? A little more. So we have enough battery capacity to power a Trinidadian home for around 3 days. But of course, you could use that battery capacity to power a community center, etc., because the bus is a mobile lithium-ion energy storage system. The current technology we have with the bus charger at the university does not allow for that. But BYD, based in the UK, especially in London, is working on a vehicle-to-grid pilot where they are using their fleet of BYD buses for that exact reason, where you could utilize the stored energy within the bus for power that can be brought to a building, a community, or even the grid.
I think that's, I mean, particularly in a wider Caribbean setting of a resilient sort of issue around post-disaster situations, could be something which is potentially particularly useful. Okay, so I don't know quite how, because originally we were supposed to finish at 3, we started very late. Do we have a bit more time? Okay, we can take, what, another 15 minutes or so? 15, okay, fantastic. Okay, so first thing is questions. Anybody have any questions? Yep. I have one here.
Hi, hello. It's just a reflection. I'm from Madrid, been living in Trinidad 3.5 years, and I was impressed when I reached here. Several things, no, regarding how people move around. So you see the amount of pickups around is impressive. Why people have so many pickups? Well, I discovered that after 6 months, I blow up 4 wheels in my SUV, so I had to move to a pickup. So are there electric solutions for that kind of cars in Trinidad? Because usually when we talk about electric cars, as you mentioned, it's about efficiency. So you don't have big cars. Usually we have electric cars, but small cars. But do we have the roads to have that kind of electric cars? Maybe not. So that's one thing. And the other is the Trinidad is blessed in many ways, and one is the sea. You have the sea, so you can utilize the sea to move around up and down to San Fernando. So that is open a complete range of additional options that other countries don't have. So that's something to look at. It doesn't have to be the electric car. Maybe there are other ways that's what I'm referring to in the end be more energy efficient. So that's my comment.
So that you're talking about that in a commuting capacity?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And you want to take the...
Yeah, so just on the last point you made about using the sea. So one very interesting development is that's happening in a couple of places around the world is the development of basically ground effect vessels for this. So that basically is a kind of a flying ship. So these things are very energy efficient because it starts out as a boat, like a seaplane, takes off, but then it doesn't fly more than about a few meters above the sea. And that creates an aerodynamic effect, which is basically a lift which is generated between the sea and the vehicle. And that allows for, a vehicle like that maybe is like a small plane carrying 6 to 8 people. That can run on a regular gasoline vehicle engine or on an electric, by electric power. So something like that operating in Trinidad and Tobago could be quite an exciting prospect. And it's a much smoother ride than you get if you're actually in a vessel. It could run at 100, maybe close to 200 kilometers per hour, at least 160 kilometers per hour. So that would allow you to sort of in 10 minutes go from Port of Spain to San Fernando. You could go down to La Brea, and that kind of using the Gulf there, which is very smooth. And it could also work in choppier waters because you just fly a little bit higher. You might lose a little bit of efficiency, but it still gives you a smooth ride on choppy waters, which opens up sort of cross, with island to island type of transport options as well. So you could use that for, and in fact, one of the developers of one of these types of flying ship vehicles is going to be here for the CIF 2022. So his name is Bill Peterson. If you're interested, you could talk to him. He's going to be here.
Oh, wow, okay. That's interesting.
Just to answer the next part of the question, you're answering that?
Yeah, I'm not going to speak to
On the pick, yeah.
pickups. Yeah.
Sure.
Just to answer your question with respect to the electrification of pickups, there really aren't a lot being offered in the market. North America we keep hearing that they're coming, and yes, they're coming, but they're going to be on the really high end in terms of pricing. I think what's probably going to happen in Trinidad and Tobago, we will start seeing, whether we like it or not, some of us, we will be having to use different models in the whole electric mobility space, because the brands that you have that you would have grown up with, not in every instance would they be affordable, because they're going to be high-end brands. So we might see some Asian. So there is at least one company locally that's going to be starting to be promoting electric pickups. They're not going to be the normal 4x4. It's going to be just the back-wheel drive at this point in time.
The other point I just make, the reason why, the road conditions do make people favor a pickup, but also the fact that diesel is incredibly heavily subsidized also rather encourages people to have large diesel engines.
Well, just to add to that, there are flood-prone areas that people need height to get through floodwaters, I guess. So some people buy pickups for that reason. What I wanted to comment on is that the three panelists, I think one common thread is you seem to realize that there has to be some kind of cultural fit to get a change towards electric vehicles. And a thought I would like you to comment on that I have is that in any transition, building confidence is very important. People wouldn't move to something if they don't have confidence. Many people may be still skeptical about not only the economics or so of electric vehicles. Some people have considerations with the charging infrastructure, and even further beyond that, the maintainability. Can local mechanics understand and service electric vehicles? Some people may be asking the traditional mechanics as they are now with petrol vehicles, what do you think about electric vehicles? And I suspect they probably are saying to preserve their own business, boy, you see them think that is trouble. Stay away from, they're probably saying that because they're not aware, they're not embracing it as yet. I'm saying that to make the point that if you look over the years, many, many very good mechanics came out of the public sector, PTSC and so, and some of the dealerships where they were trained. If electric vehicles, we focused on the public transport sector strategically, PTSC buses, you'll benefit two things. One, you don't have to have an elaborate charging infrastructure. It's point to point. You only need to set up charging stations at the bus terminus in PTSC, Sandy Grande, Arima, San Fernando. But secondly, you'll develop a cadre of people who are going to understand electric vehicle technology. And they will spawn off, they will hive off mechanics, they will leave, they will then start to want to service electric vehicles. They will want to be the owners of garages, promoting electric vehicles and servicing electric vehicles. So I'm just wondering whether strategically, if two approaches could be used. One, at the large vehicle end, you push the public sector transport through PTSC to develop a knowledge pool, knowing fully well these mechanics are going to leave, they are going to become the new mechanics of the future for electric vehicles, while at the same time going with the low-end mobility, those small vehicles. I myself am a cyclist. I have a friend, he's 82 years old, he cycles with us, but that's because he uses an electric bike. And sometimes he speeds away and we can't keep up with him, all right? So it has its small penetration, but do you think that that strategic approach had any benefit? That's my question to the panel.
Yeah, so the mic is by me, so I'll just go first and probably pass it to Graham or Curtis M afterwards.
Marcia and Donald also happy to them to chime in as well. So
right. So NESC for a long time has incorporated EVs in their syllabus, I would say since 2015. Before mechanics go to PTSC, they would normally come from NESC and then go to PTSC. In fact, when we now got the electric bus, it used to be serviced by NESC instructors and teachers. So they have been incorporating that in their curriculum. And of course, since local new car dealers have bringing in electric vehicles in Trinidad, they have trained their mechanics, and the same principle that you mentioned, that these mechanics do private work as well, so people get confidence like that. Having said that, I believe that the training and the resources available to NESC as it relates to electric vehicles needs to be increased. They need a little more training equipment. The programs need to be advertised a little more. Persons must be encouraged as well to get into the auto mechanic field. The intake numbers are always not that high. So there has been work locally in the educational sector, but it needs improving, it needs investing in. But that's just my contribution.
I don't know if the other Graham or the other Curtis. I would make it, as I move the mic.
Can I use it before I pass it on?
Yeah. Sorry, Donald, of course.
So I think we just have to start. We have the electric bus at UTT. At UTT, we have the electric bus. We don't have it on the road. It's not transporting anybody. We need to put it on the road. Just have it drive from Port of Spain to say to Arima on the priority bus route. Give people the experience of e-mobility. Put propaganda in the bus. Use it. Put posters on the side. The bus is there. Let's use it. And similarly, if we keep talking about the grand projects, we will be talking all the time. We just have to find those steps that carry us further and further along the road. Thanks.
Graham, how are we doing? We're okay for time? You want us to wrap up?
No, to see our set before I start my
Sorry,
bit.
Graham, go quickly, Aaron.
Nervous there, Dax.
Sorry?
I think Dax was nervous about the length of my next contribution.
No, not at all.
No, I think firstly I would say that electric vehicles, it's going to happen.
Yep.
It's a no-brainer as a user of an electric vehicle. If you can afford the initial upfront cost, the running costs are just crazy at the moment, crazy low. Maintenance is an absolute doddle. I think you've had yours for like 3 years, Dax.
I've spent As a point I was just going to make, do you need to be realistic that people are going to make a lot less money servicing electric cars than they make servicing internal combustion engines? Yeah. I've spent $0 on servicing my car in 3 years. Not even changed brake pads.
Yeah, and you're not going to change brake pads very often because regenerative braking means you hardly touch your brakes if you drive it carefully. So I think they're going to penetrate the market, especially because that's the way the global market is moving. More are becoming available. It's being driven primarily, I would say at the moment in Trinidad, by what I call the non-franchised car dealers, as opposed to the used car dealers, because they're bringing quite a lot of new vehicles, especially electric ones, into the market. Very appealing because they tend to be high tech. And people argue, well, you need to make it available to the masses or those who can't afford the high cost of a new electric vehicle. I disagree. You don't need to incentivize people to buy cars. You need to ensure that people can cost effectively and safely and conveniently move from A to B. Cars are not the best solution for mass transit. And so I disagree strongly with the removal of taxes and duties on hybrids. I think leaving the waivers on probably the lower end electric vehicles is a very good incentive because it is in the benefit of the country to bring in as many electric vehicles as possible, and they will filter down through the system. So I've had my car for 2 years, and I suspect in another year I'll be looking to sell that on, and I'll probably be selling it for, let's say, $150,000 for maybe $130,000. That's affordable for somebody who might otherwise be buying a non-franchised electric vehicle. So I think that's the electric vehicles will penetrate. In terms of the using the large, heavy-duty vehicles, absolutely agree. I think we need to try to do everything we can to encourage the penetration. And I think that PTSC has announced it's buying 300 electric vehicles. We have yet to see that realized. If it happens, that's definitely going to change the game. And it'll also allow PTSC to change its value proposition to the customer by providing a lot more routes, a lot more frequency of service, and appealing vehicles to travel on. Barbados has done it already. We're kind of behind the curve. A large proportion of Barbados buses are already electric, and they're very heavily used.
Okay, I think we have to wind up now. So I'd just like to thank the panelists for fantastic contributions. I know we didn't get to the Zoom. I couldn't see any questions from Zoom, so I don't know if there were. So okay, so there are no Zoom questions. So thank you to the people here on Zoom as well, and those of you in the room. I think these are conversations which could continue. To me, the sort of one of the takeaways is this idea that so much decision making has happened in Trinidad and in the wider Caribbean, based upon the structures which we've inherited in terms of structuring sectors and industries and ministries, and we've got to break those if we actually want to have sustainable solutions. Mm-hmm. So thank you. I'll hand over to the organizers and for the next panel. Thank you.